For years, the media sold you this modern-day myth, the homeless billionaire.
You were fed the image of this philosopher-king, an ascetic thinker who rejected material wealth to live out of five-star hotels, just floating above the mundane concerns of property and borders.
A beautiful narrative. It was also a masterclass in tax evasion. I mean, if you never stay in one country for more than 120, maybe 183 days a year, you never trigger tax residency.
By living as a ghost with a black Amex, Nicolas Berggruen legally detached his massive offshore empire from global taxation. The whole apparatus was anchored in the British Virgin Islands.
The illusion only shattered when he suddenly spent over $140 million on concrete and land in Los Angeles.
Purchasing the Hearst estate, sprawling mansions in Holmby Hills.
He anchored himself to the exact tax systems he spent 2 decades evading.
People look at a billionaire injecting $1 billion into an intellectual think tank, the Berggruen Institute. You see the massive endowment, the philosophical salons in Venice, the $1 million Berggruen Prize for philosophy.
You naturally believe capital is being spent to buy an outcome for society. You assume you are witnessing wealth being converted into public good.
That is the philanthropist's illusion. Look at the structural barriers surrounding that money. The $1 billion endowment is entirely walled off by the Nicolas Berggruen Charitable Trust.
Follow the SEC 13G filings. You immediately hit the Tarragona Trust, based in the British Virgin Islands, overseen by institutional trustees. We are looking at a multi-layered corporate veil.
That architecture exists to absorb catastrophic legal damage while protecting the core capital from the very societies it claims to improve.
When a man who built his initial fortune stripping the assets of bankrupt companies suddenly decides to fund the philosophy of global governance, what exactly is he buying?
The official map usually points to the 2010 acquisition of the German department store chain, Karstadt. Berggruen buys the bankrupt retail giant for a symbolic €1.
He steps in where the markets failed, promising the German public he will save 25,000 jobs. To the average observer, it looks like patient, heroic capital rushing into a burning building to stop the collapse of a national institution.
Heroic capital implies a willingness to absorb a loss for the collective good. The math on Berggruen Holdings does not allow for collective good.
Consider the International Education Corporation. This is another Berggruen property operating the Florida Career College.
The U.S. Department of Education recently shut it down for systematically scamming students out of hundreds of millions in federal grants.
In just one academic year, these corporate structures absorbed $57 million for the Florida Career College and $220 million for the United Education Institute.
The operating company collapsed under the fraud investigation, agreeing to massive penalties and campus closures.
The British Virgin Islands Trust walked away entirely untouched. They kept the dividends extracted over the years. The structure is designed to isolate the consequences of fraud from the beneficiary of the fraud.
The operational logic in both Karstadt and the education centers is asymmetric risk engineering. He didn't buy Karstadt to save it.
Upon taking control, his legal structures separated the brand's intellectual property from the physical retail stores.
Imagine buying a company, removing its name and logo, placing them in a separate holding company you control, and then forcing the physical stores to pay you to use their own name.
He charged his own failing company up to €40 million in royalties.
While he extracts those royalties, the Verdi union workers are convinced to take a €150 million pay cut to rescue the company.
He socializes the operational risk and privatizes the liquid cash.
When the restructuring predictably fails, he passes the carcass to the Austrian investor René Benko for another symbolic euro. He retains the liquidity he had already siphoned out.
Predatory capital doesn't destroy the host. It rewrites the legal structure so the host's death pays a dividend.
The German media labeled him a financial locust, but a locust merely eats what is in front of it. This requires looking at the precedent.
Long before the massive special-purpose acquisition company boom of the 2020s, Berggruen was pioneering the SPAC model alongside partners like Martin Franklin.
Between 2006 and 2012, using vehicles with heavily branded names like Freedom Acquisition and Justice Holdings, he raised billions in institutional capital to acquire companies like Burger King.
Passing a hat around a room of institutional investors asking for billions without telling them what you were actually buying. You bypass traditional IPO scrutiny.
He aggregates disparate capital, maximizes the organizer's commission, and minimizes his own skin in the game.
If the acquisition tanks, the investors absorb the blow. He keeps the fee.
Karstadt was not an anomaly. It was the application of a philosophy of extraction he learned back in the 1980s, working on leveraged buyouts with Bass Brothers Enterprises.
Extracting cash from a dying German retail chain is one thing. That is standard vulture capitalism. How does a retail asset stripper suddenly get a seat at the table with Xi Jinping?
The mechanism scales up. The official map shifts from private equity to the Berggruen Institute.
He builds a 21st century council featuring former heads of state like Gordon Brown and Ernesto Zedillo, alongside tech oligarchs like Eric Schmidt and Reid Hoffman.
On paper, it presents as a neutral academic platform dedicated to solving global issues. He positions himself entirely above the messy reality of asset stripping.
A private equity financier suddenly spending $25.5 million on a research center at Peking University requires a different lens. Look at the timeline.
The United States and China enter aggressive geopolitical decoupling. We see trade wars, tech sanctions, and mutual suspicion escalating.
In the middle of this freeze, Berggruen is facilitating private meetings with Xi Jinping. He orchestrated these high-level engagements in 2013, 2015, 2018, and 2019 under the banner of the Understanding China conferences.
The currency exchanging hands in those rooms has nothing to do with academic philosophy.
Yeah.
He is inserting himself into the most volatile bilateral relationship on the planet.
He is monetizing geopolitical friction. Traditional American think tanks like the Brookings Institution or the Council on Foreign Relations are constrained by Washington's official consensus. They cannot move freely between conflicting superpowers.
Berggruen captures the monopoly on track 2 diplomacy by offering a flexible, heavily funded back channel.
Through these carefully curated conferences, he becomes the exclusive bridge between the Chinese Communist Party elite and Silicon Valley. His capital buys diplomatic immunity.
He secures a seat at the table where the global market rules are written. It functions as institutional reputation laundering.
Eric Schmidt and Reid Hoffman do not need another academic title. They need a neutral, respectable shield to lobby for tech interests without the direct branding of Google or LinkedIn attached to their movements.
A corporate logo and a geopolitical meeting triggers suspicion. A philosophical institute creates cover. Berggruen provides that shield.
The Peking University grant buys him access to Zheng Bijian, the architect of China's peaceful rise doctrine.
You have an offshore billionaire leveraging former Western prime ministers to broker access between American tech monopolies and Chinese state power.
The former politicians convert their obsolete executive power into symbolic capital for Berggruen. They open doors that formal diplomats find locked.
Power isn't winning the negotiation. Power is owning the room where the negotiation is forced to happen.
We're looking at legacy power. The official map just pivoted again. He is no longer pushing the Think Long California Committee to fix democratic institutions or tax codes.
He abandoned legacy political reform. He is currently funding Antikythera, a program led by Benjamin Bratton focused on the philosophy of planetary computing.
He gathers Silicon Valley and Hollywood elites for closed-door salons on generative AI. He publicly positions himself as the philosopher guiding the ethical deployment of artificial intelligence.
While he funds the philosophy of the digital future, look at where he is anchoring himself physically. He is aggressively consolidating physical monopolies in Europe.
He is restoring the Palazzo Diado in Venice, building a sovereign cultural enclave perfectly timed for the 2026 Biennale. This joins his other Venetian property, the Casa dei Trecce.
Anchoring philosophical AI research inside exclusive European palaces serves a highly specific function. He is creating a diplomatic compound completely insulated from national bureaucracies. He brings in figures like Hans Ulrich Obrist to define protocol art.
Why does this matter to you? Because the next time you use a generative AI tool, the ethical boundaries of that software, what it can and cannot do, whose data it consumes, how it fundamentally alters human labor, aren't being decided by elected lawmakers in transparent parliamentary sessions.
Those boundaries are being negotiated right now in closed-door salons in Venice by a man who specializes in bypassing democratic oversight.
Governance 2.0 is the ultimate system capture. Power is visibly moving from parliaments to algorithms.
Berggruen recognizes that influencing legacy institutions is an obsolete strategy. He is actively trying to write the normative code for the technology that will replace those institutions.
Acting as the mediator between tech oligarchs and global regulators allows him to shape the ethical baseline for AI.
He defines what is culturally and legally acceptable through these Venice exhibitions and Hollywood summits. Consider his recent event with Ashton Kutcher promoting OpenAI's video tool during the intense creative strikes.
He writes the rules before the lawmakers even understand the game.
The source material leaves a massive, load-bearing void regarding liability. The public relations apparatus surrounding Berggruen insists he is a passive investor in properties like the fraudulent Florida Career College.
They point the finger at rogue management. They claim the holding company had no operational oversight when students were being saddled with illegitimate debt and fake diplomas.
The SEC 13G filings obliterate the passive investor defense. They prove 100% ownership of Berggruen Holdings through the Nicolas Berggruen Charitable Trust.
We know the corporate machine extracts the federal subsidies. We know the British Virgin Islands Trust shields the dividends.
What remains completely obscured by the legal veil is the exact moment the order for extraction is given.
The ambiguity we cannot resolve is whether this extraction machine runs on a sociopathic autopilot or if the philanthropist is actively turning the dial from a suite in Venice.
The contradiction extends deeply into his physical assets. The flight to quality over the last few years, parking capital in irreplaceable historical assets in Los Angeles, Venice, and Berlin, resembles preparation for a systemic shock.
He relies on globalization to maintain his influence network, yet he is fortifying his position in hard assets through entities like MVP Capital, which manages over $1 billion in real estate on the U.S. West Coast.
The risk of the IRS auditing his offshore structures because he triggered California tax residency is severe. The potential for the U.S. government to scrutinize his peaking university funding under foreign influence laws threatens to collapse his entire Track 2 monopoly.
He faces attacks from conservative institutions like Claremont for his political maneuvering and from leftist intellectuals decrying his intellectual gentrification.
He spent 2 decades building a ghost ship. The system worked flawlessly when he was a phantom hovering above tax codes and national allegiances, possessing absolute mobility.
Today, he has $140 million of concrete and land sitting in Los Angeles. That physical footprint exposes him to IRS audits and a sprawling architectural vulnerability in Europe.
His entire trajectory reads not as a businessman who turned to charity, but as a predator who realized the ultimate distressed asset wasn't a department store, but global governance itself.
He engineered a machine designed to extract wealth from the bottom while dictating reality to the top. People worry that billionaires like Berggruen might break the rules of the new world.
That is the wrong fear. The danger isn't that he might break the rules.
The danger is that he's already bought the pen that writes them.